Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to be honest with you. Looking at the stack of documents we have on the desk today, the FBI VICAP reports, the court transcripts from the early 80s, the biography, I'm having a hard time reconciling two things.
Which two things?
The sheer volume of the violence we are about to discuss and the silence, the total silence that surrounded it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at a subject today who confessed to 93 murders. 93.
93. It's a number that doesn't even feel real.
It doesn't. And usually when you hear a number like that, or even like a fraction of that number, you associate it with immediate infamy. You think of Ted Bundy, you think of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Right. They take up all the oxygen in the room.
They do. They become these like cultural caricatures almost immediately.
Yeah, instantly recognizable.
Exactly. But the man we are talking about today, Samuel Little, operated for 35 years, from 1970 all the way to 2005. And for the vast majority of that time, he was essentially invisible. To the public, yeah. So the mission for this deep dive isn't just to stare at the number 93 and be shocked. It's to figure out the mechanism.
The mechanism is the right word.
Yeah.
Because this isn't a ghost story. It's a mechanical failure, a failure of the justice system.
Right. How does a guy drive across America killing essentially at will, getting arrested repeatedly, and we're talking arrests in nearly every region of the country.
Mm-hmm. Again and again.
And yet never gets stopped. How does he manage to slip through the cracks time and time again?
It's a valid question, and I think the answer is, it's really uncomfortable. It's not that Samuel Little was some kind of criminal mastermind.
No.
He wasn't digging tunnels, he wasn't wearing elaborate disguises, and he wasn't taunting the police with cryptic letters like the Zodiac. He was actually quite brazen.
So the reason he's succeeded for so long, it says less about his genius.
And more about the blind spots in our society, in our systems.
That's the angle I want to really drill down into, the systemic failure angle. Because when you look at the sources, he wasn't hiding in a cabin in the woods, he was in the system.
He was. And he even had aliases. He was known as the choke and stroke killer in certain circles.
Horrifying name.
Or on the other hand, simply Mr. Sam.
Mr. Sam. It sounds so deceptively neighborly, doesn't it?
It does. It sounds like the guy who runs the corner store.
Yeah.
But then you have the choke and stroke, which is just about as graphic and disturbing an alias as I've ever heard.
It's descriptive, to say the least.
It is. And understanding the duality of those names, the brutality of the act versus the banality of the man is really key to understanding this whole case.
So we have a lot to get through. We're going to look at his biography, the specific timeline of his crimes, the media coverage by journalists like Jillian Lauren, who actually sat down with him, and the eventual involvement of the Texas Rangers.
It's a huge timeline.
It is. But before we get to the arrests, we have to start with the man himself. We have to understand the hardware we're dealing with. So let's wind the clock back to the very beginning.
It starts in Reynolds, Georgia, in 1940. Samuel Little was born Samuel McDowell on June 7th. And right from the jump, the stability just isn't there.
No. His mother, Bessie Mae, was very young. The census records list her as a maid, but Little himself, he later described her as a lady of the night.
Right. And there's this story he told about his birth, or more accurately, the days shortly after.
This is the one that's hard to verify.
It is. He claims she abandoned him on the side of a dirt road. Just left him there.
Wow.
Now, we have to be careful with Little's narration of his own life because serial killers are notoriously unreliable narrators.
Of course.
So whether that specific roadside detail is true or a memory he invented to, justify his anger later on, the feeling of abandonment was real. That trauma was the foundation.
And he ends up in Lorain, Ohio, right? Raised mainly by his grandmother.
Correct. And looking at the school records on paper, he looks, well, regular. He attends Hawthorne Junior High School. He's not living in a cave. He's interacting with other kids.
He's functioning.
He's functioning. He has an exterior life that looks somewhat average. But his interior life, that was already taking a very dark turn.
And this is where we see the seed of the crimes, as psychologists might call it.
Exactly. Little gave an account of a specific incident in kindergarten.
This part stood out to me as being so specific and yet so strange. He's, 5 or 6 years old?
Right around that age. Maybe even younger.
And he talks about a teacher touching her neck.
Yes. For most children, that is a non-event. A teacher adjusting her collar, maybe checking her pulse, or just resting her hand there in thought.
A gesture you wouldn't even notice.
You wouldn't think twice. But for Little, that visual, a woman's hand on her neck, it triggered something.
It wasn't just a memory. It was a trigger.
It triggered a sexual fantasy. And it wasn't a benign fantasy. It was a fantasy specifically about strangulation. Psychologists call this imprinting. It's when a specific image or action gets locked into the brain's arousal center at a critical developmental stage.
At 5 years old, I mean, that seems incredibly early for that kind of specific violent association.
It is early. But that's what makes him so dangerous later on.
Yeah.
This wasn't a learned behavior from a movie or something he saw on the street. Not initially. It felt innate to him.
It was just there.
It was there. And by the time he's a teenager, the wiring is set. He isn't looking at normal magazines. He's hunting down detective magazines.
Your crime magazines.
Yes, but he's not reading the articles to solve the mystery. He was specifically hunting for stories and illustrations that depicted the strangulation of women.
He was feeding the fixation.
He was curating a mental library of violence long before he ever laid a hand on a victim.
So he's just reinforcing those neural pathways. Every time he looks at those images, he's strengthening the connection between strangulation and gratification.
Exactly. And then he adds the physical component, the boxing.
This was the part that clicked for me regarding how he got away with it for so long. He wasn't just a brawler. He actually trained, right?
He did. In 1956, he's convicted of breaking and entering in Omaha, Nebraska, and sent to a juvenile institution. It's in these institutions and later in prisons that he takes up boxing.
He even called himself a former prize fighter later in life.
He did. It was part of his persona.
Was he actually a professional, or was that just talk?
That's debatable. I think it's mostly talk. But whether he was fighting for titles is totally irrelevant. What matters is that he learned the mechanics of the punch. He learned how to throw a punch with enough leverage and accuracy to knock someone out cold.
And that detail, the ability to knock someone out cold, is going to explain so much about the crime scenes later. Because if I get into a fight with someone and we are struggling, there is going to be evidence.
There will be DNA under fingernails from scratching. There will be defensive wounds on the arms. There will be noise screaming, furniture breaking, a whole mess.
But if he walks up to someone and knocks them unconscious with one clean shot,
they are dead weight. There is no struggle, no defensive wounds, no screaming. And this brings us right to the modus operandi. This specific skill set allowed him to control the entire interaction from the very first second.
So we have the predator built, we have the fantasy strangulation, we have the skill set, the knockout punch, and we have the lifestyle. He's transient, moving from Florida to Ohio to California.
He's all over the map.
Now we have to look at the victims. You mentioned earlier that he wasn't a genius, but he was selective.
He was ruthless in his selection.
Yeah.
And deeply cynical. Little targeted women who he believed society wouldn't miss. He targeted sex workers, women struggling with severe substance abuse, and homeless individuals.
He actually said that, didn't he? I recall reading a quote where he said he thought they would leave fewer clues.
He did. He was very candid about it after his confession. He said he believed that because of their lifestyles, fewer people would search for them, and police wouldn't invest the same resources.
And this is the hardest pill to swallow. He was technically correct.
He was. It's horrible, but he was right.
That is the tragedy of what criminologists call the less dead. It's a horrible term, but it describes how law enforcement and the media prioritize victims. If a suburban mom goes missing or a college student,
it's a massive manhunt. It's on the nightly news.
Precisely. We see missing posters everywhere. But if a sex worker goes missing in 1982 in a rough part of town,
it's often written off. Police might assume she just moved to another city or that she's laying low. It becomes a file on a dusty desk rather than a task force.
And Little understood that bias implicitly. He operated within that blind spot.
He did. And this brings us to the actual method, the choke and stroke. We have to talk about the physicality of it because it explains the lack of forensic evidence that often baffled coroners.
Right. So step one is the punch.
He would use his size and his boxing skills to punch his victims, usually in the jaw or temple. He would stun them or knock them completely unconscious.
So they are incapacitated from the start.
Instantly. Once they were down, he would strangle them. And the source material is very graphic here. He would strangle them to death, sometimes letting them regain consciousness only to strangle them again.
He described playing with their lives.
Yes. And the moniker choke and stroke implies that he was engaging in sexual gratification, likely masturbation, during the act of strangulation.
It's purely sadistic. It's about total control over life and death.
It is, but here is the forensic problem. Because the method was strangulation, often without a struggle, and the victims were often people with high-risk lifestyles, coroners would sometimes misclassify the deaths.
How does a coroner miss a murder? I mean, surely there are marks on the neck.
Not always. If he uses a broad surface, like a forearm, rather than fingers, the bruising can be minimal. Or if the body is found days later in a warm climate, decomposition can hide the petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes.
So if they find a body with no bullet holes, no stab wounds, and the person has a history of drug use,
They might just assume overdose. Or natural causes heart failure brought on by lifestyle. A lot of these were initially ruled undetermined.
so he knew that if he didn't use a weapon, he wasn't leaving a murder weapon behind. His hands were the weapon.
And he dumped the bodies in alleys, dumpsters, wooded areas, even rivers like the Mississippi. He treated them like refuse.
He didn't bury them?
No. He didn't try to hide them meticulously because he didn't think anyone would look close enough to catch him.
But he wasn't invisible. And this is the part that makes you want to scream at the history books. There were near misses. The 1980s, looking at this timeline, the 1980s should have been the end of Samuel Little's story. He was caught.
Multiple times. This is where the systemic failure moves from theoretical to concrete. Let's look at 1982 in Mississippi. He was arrested for the murder of Melinda Roselfree.
She had gone missing in September of that year.
Correct. Little was a suspect. He was in custody. But the grand jury declined to indict him.
They didn't feel there was enough evidence to go to trial.
Nope. They let him go.
So he walks. But he doesn't go underground. He doesn't flee the country. He goes to Florida. And that same year, he is charged with the murder of Patricia Ann Mount.
Now, in this case, they actually went to trial. This wasn't just a grand jury dismissal. They had him in court. Prosecution witnesses identified Little. They placed him with her the night before she disappeared. They had him.
So paint the picture for me. You're in that courtroom in Florida. You have the guy who was last seen with the victim. You have his violent history. Because by this point, he has a rap sheet, a mile long, for assault and theft.
Very long rap sheet.
How does a jury look at that and say, not guilty?
It comes down to who the witnesses were.
Mhm.
The prosecution was relying on the testimony of women who moved in the same circles as Little and the victim.
So likely other sex workers or people on the margin.
Exactly. So their credibility was on trial.
Right, not just his guilt.
The defense strategy was classic dismantling. You attack the character of the witness. Oh, you were high that night. Oh, you have a record for solicitation. Why should the jury believe you? They made the jury doubt the source of the truth, so the truth itself got discarded.
That is, it's systemic gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
The jury sees a criminal testifying against a criminal and decides it's a wash.
And the result was an acquittal in January 1984. Mistrust of witness testimonies was the official reason cited.
So bias literally opened the jail cell door and let a serial killer walk out.
It did. And the cost was catastrophic.
Yeah.
Because just months later, he is in California.
This is the Lori Barrows case, and this one, I don't know how this happens. Lori Barrows survived, right?
She did. She was kidnapped and strangled, but she managed to survive. She identified him.
So you have a survivor, a living witness. And not only that, when the police found him, he was in his car. And what was in the back seat?
Another woman, unconscious, beaten and strangled, in the exact same location where he had attacked Burroughs.
I mean, come on. That's a smoking gun, a fingerprint, and a confession all wrapped in one. He's got a body in the car. He has a survivor pointing at him.
You would think this is the end of the line. Life in prison. Case closed.
But he served only 2.5 years?
2.5 years.
I looked at that number in the notes 3 times to make sure it wasn't a typo. How? How is that possible?
It's not a typo. It reflects the plea bargain culture of the justice system, especially in the 80s when courts were overwhelmed. The prosecutors likely looked at the victims, looked at the cost and risk of a long trial, maybe fearing another acquittal like in Florida.
And they took the easy win.
They took the easy win. They likely allowed him to plead to assault with great bodily injury rather than attempted murder.
They cleared the docket. They got a conviction on paper.
But they released a monster. He was released in February 1987.
And what did he do? Did he reform? Did he retire?
No. He immediately moved to Los Angeles. And according to the records and his later confessions, he committed at least 10 more murders right after that release, in L.A. alone.
That is the tragedy of the justice system right there. He was in custody, they knew he was violent, and they let him go to kill 10 more people in one city.
It also highlights the fragmentation of the system in the pre-digital age. In the 80s, information didn't travel like it does today. A conviction in Florida or an arrest in Mississippi didn't necessarily pop up on a computer screen in a California patrol car.
So he was exploiting the linkage blindness between jurisdictions.
Exactly. He was moving, and the information wasn't keeping up.
So he continues this spree for decades. Fast forward to 2012. the fall of Mr. Sam, and like so many of these guys, Bundy with the traffic stop, Berkowitz with the parking ticket, he doesn't get caught in a high-speed chase or a dramatic standoff.
No, it's the banality of evil again. He was arrested at a homeless shelter, the Wayside Christian Shelter in Louisville, Kentucky.
And what were the charges?
Murder.
Narcotics charges. Just a routine drug bust. He was an old man by then, staying in a shelter.
Unbelievable. But this time, something was different. The technology had finally changed. DNA testing. That was the turning point. When they arrested him in Kentucky, they eventually extradited him to California on those narcotics charges because of an outstanding warrant. But once he was in custody in L.A., authorities did what they couldn't do in 1984.
They ran his DNA.
They ran his DNA, and suddenly the ghosts of the 80s showed up.
The cold cases.
Exactly. The DNA matched 3 cold cases from Los Angeles. Carol Linda Alford, killed in 1987, Audrey Nelson Everett, 1989, and Guadalupe Apodaca, also 1989.
Let's talk about those cases for a second to honor them. Carol Linda Alford.
She was found in a Los Angeles alley. DNA was recovered from under her fingernails. This was one of the rare cases where there was a struggle, or perhaps he slipped up.
Okay. And Audrey Nelson Everett.
Found in a dumpster behind a nightclub.
And Guadalupe Apodaca.
Found in an abandoned auto repair shop. A boy kicking a soccer ball found her.
These poor women, they had been waiting for justice for over 20 years.
And finally, the science caught up. The LAPD linked him to these 3 murders. He was charged in January 2013.
The trial happens in 2014. And the prosecution strategy was interesting. They didn't just use the DNA, did they?
Yeah, this was crucial. They brought in the survivors.
The women from the 80s.
Yes, women who had survived his attacks decades earlier, including women from that Mississippi and Florida era. They used their testimony to establish propensity.
Basically showing the jury, this is his blueprint, this is his pattern.
Exactly. The stun punch, the strangulation, the sexual motive. It showed the jury that this wasn't just random DNA found at a scene. This was a specific predator with a specific ritual. It corroborated the physical evidence with behavioral evidence.
And this time, the jury believed them.
They did. On September 25, 2014, Samuel Little was found guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
And his reaction, what did he do?
He screamed in court, "I didn't do it."
He maintained his innocence right to the bitter end of the trial. He played the victim.
So 2014, he's locked up, life sentence, case closed, right? He's an old man in prison. He's going to die there.
You'd think so. But that's not the end of the story. That's actually just the beginning of the truth coming out.
That's right. For 4 years, he sits there. But then in 2018, there's a shift. Little wants a transfer.
He wants to move. Why?
He wanted to get out of the Los Angeles County Prison. He apparently didn't like the environment there. It was too noisy, or he didn't like the cell. He wanted to be moved to a different facility. So he was willing to trade.
He was willing to trade bodies for a better cell. That is so transactional and cold.
It is psychopathic. The catalyst was a visit from Texas Ranger James Holland. The source material mentions him specifically regarding the murder of Denise Christie brothers in Odessa, Texas.
Denise Christie brothers, she was killed in 1994.
Correct. Holland is a skilled interviewer. He went there to talk about the brothers' case, but he managed to build a rapport. He played to Little's ego.
And Little started talking.
He confessed to the brothers' murder. But once he started talking, he didn't stop. It was like a dam breaking.
This is where we get the 93 number. He starts listing them off, one after another, across 14 states.
And the detail was the shocking part. He wasn't just saying, "I killed a woman in Florida." He knew details that only the killer could know. He knew about the locations, a specific dirt road, a specific dumpster. He knew how the bodies were positioned.
The FBI VICAP team, that's the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program,
Right.
They got involved. They started verifying these confessions.
And they confirmed over 60 of them. That is an incredibly high rate of verification for cold cases, going back 40 years.
It speaks to his memory. He had what some might call a photographic memory for his crimes.
He could visualize the scenes perfectly. To him, these weren't people, they were trophies. And he remembered where he put every single trophy.
And speaking of visualizing, we have to talk about the sketches.
Right.
This is the most haunting part of the whole story for me. It's unique in the annals of criminal history, isn't it?
It is. I've never seen anything quite like it. Little didn't just confess with words. He asked for art supplies, pastels, pencils, and he drew portraits of his victims.
26 of them. And I've seen these drawings. They aren't stick figures. They are portraits. They have colored eyes, specific hairstyles, specific clothing.
He remembered the shape of their faces. He remembered the earrings they were wearing. It's an incredible, awful level of detail.
It's terrifying. It's like he kept a gallery in his head for decades. But there is a silver lining here, if you can call it that. The FBI used these sketches.
They did. They released them to the public. They hoped that someone would recognize a mother, a sister, a daughter who had gone missing. Because remember, many of these victims were Jane Does.
They had never been identified.
Never. And it worked in some cases.
It did. For example, in Memphis, there was a victim known only as a Jane Doe. Little provided a sketch. And in 2022, that sketch helped identify her as Zena Marie Jones.
Zena Marie Jones. She was found in 1990, identified in 2022. That's 32 years later, because he drew her face.
It's a complex legacy. The killer himself providing the key to restoring the identity of the victim he destroyed.
It's a final act of control, in a way, but one that, at least provided closure for some families.
Let's get specific on the geography for a minute. We said he was all over the place. But there were clusters. Ohio was a big one.
Ohio was home base, in a way. He grew up there, and he killed there.
Cleveland, specifically.
Yes. He killed Mary Jo Payton in 1984. She remained unidentified until 1992. He also killed Rose Evans in 1991. Both strangled, both dumped.
And Cincinnati.
Annie Lee Stewart, killed in 1981. Her body was dumped in Grove City. And then there were others in Akron and Columbus. He confessed to leaving a Jane Doe by a cigarette billboard.
A cigarette billboard. That's such a specific, mundane detail. It anchors the crime in a specific time and place.
It does. It shows how the landscape of America was just a backdrop for his violence.
Then you have the South. Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana.
In Macon, Georgia, he confessed to killing Fredonia Smith in 1982 and Yvonne Pless way back in 1977. Mississippi was a frequent hunting ground, too. Julia Critchfield, thrown off a cliff in 1978. Nancy Carroll Stevens, much later in 2005. That was one of his later crimes.
In Louisiana.
Melissa Thomas in 1996. Dorothy Richards in 1982. The list just goes on and on.
It's relentless. Prince George's County, Maryland, West Memphis, Arkansas. It really shows how he used the interstate system. He was a shark, always moving.
The highway was his habitat. And every time he crossed the state line, he reset the clock on the investigation. He knew that the police in Georgia weren't talking to the police in Arkansas.
I want to pivot to the media aspect.
What?
Because for a long time, nobody was telling this story. But then Jillian Lauren comes into the picture.
This is a fascinating intersection of journalism and investigation. Jillian Lauren started out writing crime fiction, but she became drawn to this story. She moved to nonfiction to cover Little.
She actually sat down with him.
For over 40 hours. She interviewed him in prison.
Can you imagine sitting across from a man who has killed 93 women for 40 hours, listening to him detail these things?
It takes a specific kind of fortitude. But she built a rapport. The dynamics were strange. He sent her drawings. He seemed to enjoy the attention. But through that relationship, she got him to confess to multiple murders that weren't previously solved.
So her work, the article in The Cut, the book Behold the Monster, the docuseries, it really helped bring the scale of this to the public eye.
She acted as a conduit. She amplified the voices of the victims by getting the killer to speak their names or at least describe them.
Now we have to touch on his personal life, because he wasn't always alone. He had a long-term girlfriend, Aurelia Dorsey.
This is another bizarre chapter, Aurelia Dorsey. She was essentially his partner, though not necessarily in the murders themselves, but in life. She supported them both, largely through shoplifting, according to the sources.
But the origin of their relationship is what gets me. It's so strange.
It is very strange. Dorsey was cellmates with Little's previous girlfriend, Lucy Madero.
Okay, let me get this straight. Little has a girlfriend, Lucy. Lucy gets arrested. She's in a cell with Aurelia. Lucy tells Aurelia she's going to testify against Little in a robbery case.
Correct. And Aurelia, the cellmate, takes that information, goes to Little's defense team, and helps them prepare against Lucy's testimony.
She betrays her cellmate to help the boyfriend and then steals the boyfriend.
Essentially, she helps him beat the rap, and then she becomes his girlfriend. And they stayed together until she died in 1988.
It's a twisted loyalty. But it shows he could manipulate people. He could maintain relationships. He wasn't a complete loner in the sense that he couldn't talk to women.
He was charming when he wanted to be. He could normalize himself.
Yeah.
He could pass as a human being, which made him all the more dangerous.
So Aurelia dies in 1988. He continues killing until 2005, finally arrested in 2012, confesses in 2018, and then the end comes.
December 30, 2020. Samuel Little died in a Los Angeles hospital.
What was the cause?
He had health issues, diabetes, heart problems. The official cause was undetermined or natural causes. He was an old man.
He died an old man in a hospital bed, which is a lot more peaceful than the way his victims died.
It is. There is no cosmic balance in the manner of his death compared to his crimes. He got to live a long life.
So what does this all mean? When we look back at the legacy of Samuel Little, beyond just the horror of the number 93.
We have to acknowledge the magnitude. He is the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history by confirmed victims. That is a dark historical fact. But we also have to look at the mirror he holds up to the justice system.
The aha moment for me is that he wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a phantom. He was a man who drove a car, who got arrested for shoplifting, who lived with a girlfriend.
He was right there. But he relied on the marginalization of his victims. He relied on the fact that if he killed a Jane Doe in a bad neighborhood, the investigation would stall. He wasn't hiding. We were looking away.
That's the hard truth. We were looking away. And even today, we are still catching up.
And that brings us to the final thought.
The sketches.
Yes. Little drew many women. We've identified Zena Marie Jones. We've identified others. But there are still sketches out there.
Detailed portraits of women who are still listed as Jane Does.
Somewhere out there are families who still don't know what happened to their missing loved one. They are waiting for an answer. And the answer might be sitting in an FBI file, a sketch drawn by the killer himself, waiting for a match.
That is a haunting thought to end on. If you want to see those sketches, they are available on the FBI's website. Maybe, just maybe, someone listening can help close another case.
It's possible. The story isn't quite over yet.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It was a heavy one, but an important one. We'll catch you on the next one.
Stay curious and stay safe.
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are looking directly into, well, one of the darkest corners of the American justice system. We're dissecting the case of Samuel Little. For anyone who follows true crime, that name represents a number that it's almost impossible to comprehend. 93 confessed murders.
And between 1970 and 2005, the FBI has confirmed over 60 of those. So officially, that makes him the most prolific serial killer in the history of the United States. He killed everywhere, from Miami all the way to Los Angeles, leaving this trail of bodies that just spanned the entire continent.
It's a case that forces us to, basically burn the traditional profile of a serial killer. We talk about figures like Bundy or Gacy, and we think of men living these double lives, upstanding citizens by day, monsters by night. But Samuel Little didn't have a double life. He was a transient. He had a criminal record a mile long. He was constantly in custody.
And yet, he operated with absolute impunity for 35 years.
And that really gets us to the central question we need to tackle today. How does a man who is constantly getting arrested, constantly interacting with police, manage to murder nearly 100 women? Was Samuel Little some kind of criminal mastermind, a genius of evasion, or was his reign of terror just the result of a justice system that decided his victims didn't matter?
Well, I think the comfortable answer is to blame the system. It lets us off the hook. It lets us believe that if the police had just done their jobs, he would have been stopped. But I think that perspective is dangerous because it underestimates the adversary. I'm going to argue that Samuel Little had a terrifying predatory intelligence. He used a specific methodology, a deep understanding of forensic limits, and a manipulation of geography to actively exploit the system's blind spots. He wasn't just slipping through the cracks. He was measuring them and prying them open himself.
See, I have to push back on this idea of intelligence or genius right away, because when you actually look at the timeline, this was not some phantom moving through the world unseen. This was a man operating in broad daylight with a spotlight on him. I mean, by 1975, Samuel Little had been arrested 26 times in 11 different states. And we're not talking about parking tickets. We're talking about theft, assault, attempted rape, fraud. He was a known entity.
But being known for assault and being caught for serial murder are two very, very different things.
But he was caught for murder. The system had him in its jaws repeatedly and just spat him out. Look at the early 80s. In 1982, he's in Pascagoula, Mississippi. He's arrested. He's charged with the murder of Melinda Rose LaPree. The evidence is there, but a grand jury declines to indict him. Later that same year, he's extradited to Florida for the murder of Patricia Ann Mount. Witnesses put him with her the night she vanished, and yet he was acquitted.
Okay, but you're listing legal outcomes. You have to look at why those outcomes happened. You say it's police apathy, but I see Little's active hand at work there. He understood the burden of proof. He knew that without a smoking gun, he could walk. And he made sure there was never a smoking gun. And this goes directly to his method.
You're talking about the strangulation?
I'm talking about the specific technique he called the choke and stroke. It's a grotesque term, but it was a calculated method of evasion. Little was a former boxer. He called himself a prize fighter. He understood anatomy. He didn't use knives. He didn't use guns, so there were no shell casings, no unique stab wounds a coroner could trace.
Sure, but strangulation still leaves evidence. Bruising, petechia in the eyes.
Not always, and certainly not to the forensic standards of the 70s and 80s, especially in, rural counties. He would strangle a victim until they passed out, let them revive, and then repeat it. And the reason that's so relevant is because unlike a sudden, violent crushing of the windpipe, this method often left the hyoid bone intact. So when these bodies were found, there are no bullet holes, no stab wounds, often very little external trauma. To a coroner in a small town, looking at a victim who maybe has a history of substance abuse, it doesn't scream murder. It looks like a heart attack. It looks like an overdose. He was killing people in a way that mimicked natural death. That is a forensic countermeasure.
I acknowledge the brutality of the method, I do. But I think you're giving him credit for countermeasures when he was really just relying on bias. He didn't trick the coroners just didn't look hard enough because of who the victims were. And this brings me to the core of my argument: victim selection. He didn't just choose a method, he chose a specific demographic. He targeted women he knew society would ignore: sex workers, women battling addiction, homeless or transient women.
He was certainly aware of their status.
Aware? He was counting on it. He told investigators later, and I'm quoting, "I'm not going to go over there into the white neighborhood and pick out a little teenage girl." He said, "I'm going to go to the bust-down neighborhood." He believed these victims would leave fewer clues and, most chillingly, leave fewer persons to search for them. In that 1982 Florida acquittal, why didn't the jury trust the witnesses? Well, because the witnesses were from the same marginalized world as the victim. The system decided their word just wasn't worth a conviction. Little didn't outsmart the jury. He relied on the jury's prejudice.
I don't disagree that the prejudice existed, but I argue that Little's ability to identify and exploit that prejudice is the genius. It's a dark, predatory form of market research. He knew exactly where the defenses were down, and he didn't just rely on who they were, he relied on where he put them. This is the geography component.
The cross-country travel.
Exactly. She treated the interstate highway system as his personal hunting ground. He realized something that law enforcement wouldn't admit for decades. Police departments operate in silos. They don't talk to each other. He could kill in Mississippi on a Tuesday, dump the body in a swamp, and be in California by Friday.
But is driving a car really genius, so? Or is it just having gas money?
It is when you use it to fragment an investigation. He knew that a sheriff in Pascagoula isn't checking missing persons reports in Los Angeles. He used mobility as camouflage, and he was disciplined about it. He never stayed in one place long enough for a pattern to form. He also actively destroyed the crime scene by using nature. He dumped Mary Jo Payton in a basement in Cleveland. He put Zena Marie Jones in the Mississippi River. He was managing the crime scene long after he left it.
I want to accept that theory. I really do. This idea of him as a ghost who just vanished. But then we have to talk about San Diego, 1984. This is the case that, for me, just destroys the mastermind theory and proves the system is fundamentally broken.
The Lori Barrows case.
Yes, October 1984. Little attacks a 22-year-old woman named Lori Barrows. Miraculously, she survives. She plays dead. He dumps her, she escapes. Little is arrested a month later, and when the police find him, he's in the backseat of his car. But he isn't alone. There is another unconscious woman in the car with him. He is literally caught with a pile of victims.
It's a smoking gun.
It's a smoking cannon. And what happens? Does the genius talk his way out of it? No. He gets convicted. But the system, the judges, the prosecutors, they look at this man with a rap sheet from here to the moon, caught with 2 strangled women, and they give him 2.5 years.
It's an appalling sentence.
It's not just appalling, it's an invitation. He served his 2 years, he was released in February of 1987, and what did he do? He moved to LA and immediately killed at least 10 more women. That is not a man outsmarting the police. That is a revolving door. The system knew who he was, knew what he did, and let him out to do it again. If that sentence had been appropriate, 20 years, life, dozens of women would be alive today.
I agree the sentencing was a catastrophic failure, but I think you're glossing over how he managed to secure such light sentences throughout his career. It wasn't just luck. He treated the courtroom like another arena to manipulate. He had accomplices. We have to talk about Aurelia Dorsey.
Right, his longtime girlfriend.
Well, more than a girlfriend, I mean, she was effectively his intelligence officer. This is where the criminal enterprise aspect comes in. Go back to 1971. Little was facing robbery charges in Cleveland. Looked bad. The prosecution had a solid witness. But Aurelia Dorsey gets herself thrown into the same holding cell as the prosecution's key witness, a woman named Lucy Madero. Dorsey spends days befriending her, getting her to talk, finding the holes in her story.
She was a spy.
She was an operative. She fed that information back to Little's defense attorney, who used it to just destroy the witness on the stand. They got an acquittal. He wasn't just sitting in his cell hoping for the best. He was running counter-ops. He manipulated people. He knew how to present himself as this aging prize fighter who just got into a few scrapes, not a sexual sadist. That is a high-level manipulation of human psychology.
I see the manipulation there. I do. But let's fast forward to how this actually ended. For 40 years, he operates, he kills, he moves, he gets arrested for petty crimes, he gets out. How is he finally caught? Is it a brilliant profiler? A detective who connects the dots across state lines?
No, it wasn't.
Exactly. He's arrested at a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky in 2012. Not for murder, for a narcotics charge, a routine drug bust. And the only reason they catch him for the murders is because they extradite him to California and run a routine DNA swab.
The database caught him.
A computer caught him. The DNA matched the cold cases of Carol Alford, Audrey Everett, and Guadalupe Apodaca from the late 80s. If DNA technology hadn't advanced to that point, Samuel Little would have died a free man. It wasn't human intelligence. It was data processing cleaning up a 40-year mess of human incompetence. He was right under their noses, living in shelters, getting arrested, and nobody put it together until a machine did it for them.
I'm not so sure it's that cut and dry. Yes, DNA links him to 3 murders, but we are talking about 93. The DNA didn't solve the other 90 cases. Samuel Little did.
Because he wanted a prison transfer.
Because he viewed it as a transaction. Even in defeat, he was negotiating terms. In 2018, he's serving life. He's in LA, he hates it there. So he starts talking to a Texas Ranger, James Holland. He confesses to a murder in Odessa. But he doesn't stop there. He opens the floodgates.
A deluge of confessions.
And this brings us back to his mind. The detail he provided was photographic. He didn't just say, I killed a woman in 1982. He described the shape of their eyes. He described their hairstyles. He remembered the specific intersection where he met them. He was correcting the police files. The detectives would say, we found the body in 1988, and Little would say, no, that was 1987, and she was wearing a yellow shirt.
It is deeply disturbing that he held on to those memories with such clarity.
It's more than disturbing. It's proof of his dominance. And then there are the sketches. This is the part that truly separates him from just some chaotic drifter. He drew them. He asked for pastels and paper, and he produced these detailed color portraits of his victims, 26 of them.
I've seen them. They are haunting. The eyes just look right at you.
They are the only record that some of these women ever existed. And that's the supreme irony here. The justice system had to rely on the killer's art to identify the victims it had forgotten. He was the archivist of his own crimes. Without his roadmap, women like Zena Marie Jones would still be Jane Does. I mean, she wasn't identified until 2022, 2 years after Little died, purely based on his sketch. He was leading the investigation from the grave.
But doesn't that just reinforce my point about the less dead? The fact that the police needed the killer to tell them a murder had even occurred proves they weren't looking. He confessed to a murder in Prince George's County, Maryland, That victim was one of only 2 unidentified homicide victims in that entire county. How do you not connect that? The body was there, the killer was there, but nobody cared enough to put the pieces together until the killer handed them the solution.
I think we have to distinguish between not caring and not seeing. The system is fractured. It's a collection of silos. Little understood that better than the people running the silos. He knew that if he killed a woman in Cincinnati and left her by a cigarette billboard, which he did, the Cincinnati police would treat it as a local overdose. They wouldn't call Cleveland. They wouldn't call Kentucky. He exploited the bureaucracy.
It's a failure of information sharing, absolutely, but it's also a failure of empathy. I mean, if 93 college students had vanished from Ivy League campuses, the FBI would have connected the dots in 6 months. But 93 marginalized women vanish over 35 years, and it takes a computer algorithm in 2012 to finally ring the alarm bell. That is a systematic indictment that goes way beyond bureaucracy.
I agree that it is, but I still maintain that if he had targeted Ivy League students, he would have just changed his tactics. That's the terrifying part of his intelligence. He was an adaptive predator, a chameleon. He looked like the background noise of the city. He used his invisibility as a weapon.
And that brings us to the tragedy of the timeline. He died in a hospital in 2020. He was 80 years old. He spent the vast majority of those 80 years free. He lived a full life. He ate what he wanted, he drove where he wanted, and he robbed 93 women of everything.
He saw himself as a winner. He called himself a prizefighter to the very end. He believed he had beaten the house. And in a very grim technical sense, he did.
So where does that leave us? Was he a genius, or was the system just that broken?
I think the synthesis is the most terrifying option. He was a predatory genius specifically suited for a broken system. He was the perfect pathogen for a weak immune system. If the police had been better, maybe he would have been caught earlier. But if he hadn't been so skilled at manipulation and methodology, he wouldn't have lasted past that first arrest.
I can agree with that. He was a man who had a specific, terrible set of skills, operating in a world that refused to value the lives he took. It was a perfect storm of malice and negligence.
And the storm hasn't fully passed. The FBI has confirmed 60 murders, but he confessed to 93. That means there are still over 30 families out there with no answers. The sketches are still on the FBI website.
And that is the final takeaway. This case isn't closed just because Samuel Little is dead. We encourage our listeners to look at those sketches in the FBI's VCAP program. Because the system failed them once, we shouldn't fail them again by forgetting they exist.
Indeed. Understanding how he operated is the only way to ensure the next prizefighter doesn't get a 35-year career.
Thank you for joining the debate.
Until next time.